So I am joined today by Camille Batiste. Welcome.
Thank you, Emma. So happy to be with you today.
Really pleased to be chatting with you and navigating time zones. Again, I seem to be doing that a little bit at the moment. So appreciate your flexibility on the
Absolutely.
timing of this conversation. Super interested, Camille, to get into particularly your framework around leadership and how you talk about and think about leadership skills for people. But before we do that, with a podcast like mine, with a name like mine, it's always going to start with a little bit about your own career journey. So tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Thank you so much, Emma. So, quick summary of my journey. I grew up in Jamaica all the way through high school. So, some people will be familiar with O levels and A levels. So, I did
It's
that.
the English way, yeah.
Yeah. And I have a quick story there, which I'll share in during the conversation. When I was in Jamaica, as most Jamaicans do, it's a small island, so everybody has the aspiration to leave, to go explore the world. And not only did I want to leave, I wanted to go very far away. And so I applied to several schools, but Stanford University was my first choice, which is in the US, but on the West Coast. And I really just wanted to sort of, become more independent, be challenged academically, and that I was. And even during my time at Stanford, I did have the desire to move back home to contribute to Jamaica and Jamaica's development, but that was not to be. I just couldn't find the job that I wanted and ended up moving back to the US. My first real girl or big girl job was as a chemical engineer in the southern part of the US in Louisiana. And even with that, that was actually a perfect job opportunity, which the intent was for me to work in this plant for 2 years and then be able to move back to Jamaica. That this company had plants in Jamaica as well as in the US. But unfortunately for them, or unfortunately for me, or fortunately, I don't know, I met my husband during that 2 year period. And by 2 years, we were married and my assignment ended. So I left that company and I ended up joining Honeywell International, which at the time was Allied Signal as a chemical engineer, and really built my career at Honeywell. I would tell you a lot of the lessons that I've learned and who I am as a leader, I developed during my 20 years at Honeywell. So at Honeywell, I joined as a process engineer, a production engineer in a plant. I moved into IT, implementing SAP, moved into procurement and supply chain, which I absolutely loved, and spent almost the rest of my career in some version of procurement and supply chain. First in the chemical side of Honeywell, and then I was asked to move to the aerospace division of Honeywell. So I spent
Oh,
2 years in aeros, more indirect procurement, more services and non-manufacturing equipment. And then I moved into direct, which is the components for the engines that we were making. And so in those 2 years, I moved from senior director to vice president, and certainly that changes the level of interaction that you have
mm.
in the organization. And the inflection then for me for leaving Honeywell, I was recruited into Archer Daniels Midland, which is an agriculture company or an agribusiness company. And I didn't know much about agribusiness or agriculture at all. So the opportunity at ADM that I had was to take a lot of the learnings that I had at Honeywell, whether it was in procurement and procurement best practices, or even in my leadership style, and bring that in bring those best practices in to ADM and to mature the ADM function. Fortunately for me, one of the things that I learned through my journey was not just to bring the technical elements of what I learned in procurement, but to also bring my full self as a leader and to show up as a leader. And I'm saying this in hindsight because what I recognize was as I came into the organization and I came in not as growing up there, but coming in as a leader, I was perceived as ready and capable for other things, maybe even more ready and more capable than I thought I was. So I
Mm.
was recruited into doing a lot of different things, and I had a lot of really great, exciting opportunities outside of procurement. So I was asked to work on some commercial projects and broader supply chain projects. So much so that by the time I left ADM 1 year ago, I was responsible for the end-to-end supply chain of one of the business units. At one point, I was responsible for the transformation office of the enterprise, and I also helped to build up the supply chain planning function within the company. So, you know, all of that sort of culminated with what I felt like, gosh, I've done all the things that I want to do. There was one thing I haven't done, and I'm still on this quest. I've always wanted to run a business. And that hasn't happened yet, but I'm working on it, and we can talk about that as we go through this conversation.
So interesting. And I think what I like particularly, or I think the part of that experience that really resonates, and we'll sort of go on to talk about in more detail, is that
Mhm.
some of the skills required to essentially navigate those big corporate organizations, and how you, as you said, kind of show up and are perceived as a leader, is not actually a reflection of your technical skills and your ability to actually, quote unquote, do the job. That there's a whole other set of skills that kind of
Mhm.
sit around that. I guess that we, blanket sort of call them leadership skills, but there's
Mhm.
there's a lot in there kind of outside
Yeah.
of that. And going into what you do now, and kind of sharing that experience with others, what kind of drove you to
Mhm.
do that? What was the motivation behind that,
Yeah.
apart from wanting to build your own business?
Sure, certainly. So, one of the things that I realized as I was contemplating this new phase in life and, jumping ship and into the unknown was what are the elements of my corporate life that I enjoy and the elements that I don't enjoy. And the ones I didn't enjoy are the ones nobody enjoys. It's the meetings and the presentations and the meetings after the meetings, which seem to not be very valuable. And I think that is correct. But the part of the job that I very much enjoyed was the time that I spent investing in people. And whether that was in coaching my own team or others, mentoring other people, getting coached, even, I found
Yeah.
that was also very helpful and enjoyable. And I wanted to try to explore what could an enterprise or a business or an offering look like for me to enhance my own skills to do a better job of that. Because not only do I have people when it comes to work in my life, I have my own family and I raise teenagers, and they need coaching too. And even the young adults that they are today need coaching as well. And so I've landed on coaching. And I'm taking the time now to learn what are the skills of coaching and what value does that bring, and how does that help an individual go from where they are today to where they want to be. So that's one element of what I do today. The second element of what I do today, which is connected, is simply teaching some of those skills which I think are lacking. And one of when I think about my own career and I think about the people that are in my life that are either in the organizations that I came from or people that I've are part of my broader network, there may be three phases in your career, the way I think about it. There's your entry phase, there's that middle, maybe the messy middle when you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want. And then there's that the end phase where when you're really, really, I think, creating quite a lot of value, giving back, but you've essentially decided you are where you're going to be. And what I found is that there's a lot of support for entry level, right? We have rotation programs, we offer mentoring. A lot of times we have cohorts of people coming into an organization that
Yeah.
support each other. And then when you are identified as a leader or you are a leader, there's a connection there as well. Now there are challenges, leadership is lonely and there's things there, but there are things that are available and books that are written on how to be a great leader. Where I feel like there's a gap, and I call it the forgotten middle, is is nobody tells you how to get there.
Yeah.
So, when you're early in career, you're deploying those technical skills. I was an engineer and I was solving pressure and volume and flow problems, and that was my job. And as an executive, I knew that I was running an organization and I had support to do that. But it was trial and error to get to that point that I started to learn what does it take to get from capable individual contributor to effective leader.
Mm.
And so that audience is my target audience. And so I've developed a course. In fact, we just recorded the last module earlier today. So I'm really glad to start to package
Congratulations. That's
that.
a
I'm very
big milestone.
excited.
Yeah.
Yes, very excited. But I developed the course to help people walk through what are those skills that really need to be in place in order to move to those positions and really to develop yourself as well,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of that comes from not just what you do or what you think or a little bit of what you say, but how are you perceived as a leader? Because that's that
Yeah.
really, you can't lead if people don't see you as a leader. And so
Yeah.
that sometimes is a shift that a lot of early and mid-career people are not aware of. So my goal now is to essentially, I think in the US, I don't know if it's the US or in general, spill the tea, right? Not hold
Yeah.
back, but to
Yeah. Yeah.
share, to
Yeah.
share the
Yeah.
knowledge. And it's not difficult once you know. But if you
Yeah.
don't know, you're kind of in the dark. And I really want to bring that light to bear.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you've just said, and I love your terminology there about the forgotten middle. And there is that, as you say, there's that kind of gap between, as we said before, being good at your job and being acknowledged for your technical skills, and then how do I get from there to perhaps my first management role and taking on a team. And I think also there's perhaps a lack of awareness sometimes, which is obviously what you're trying to combat, about what are the skills that bridge that gap. If I've, and it's the same, is it? You go through school and you're rewarded for your technical knowledge, for being able to give the right answer, and same at university. And then you maybe get into a graduate program for the same reason, and then after a little bit of time, there's probably this awareness that the old cliche of the skills that got me here won't get me to the next bit, but not necessarily being clear on what those skills are, and also really importantly not knowing where to go to gain those skills. So yeah, I think it is a sort of a little forgotten little forgotten
Yeah.
hole in the knowledge there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so talk to me about the framework that you have developed, because I love the outwardly simple nature of it. They're the best things, aren't they? Easy to understand, and then the
Mhm.
complexity sometimes is in actually developing that. But yeah, talk me through the framework and
Sure.
how you conceive of each of those parts.
Sure. Happy to do that. And it actually starts back in my university years. I would say that through high school was relatively easy for me. Not 100% easy. I did have some courses that I found challenging. Physics was one of them, and calculus was another one, or ad math is what we called it. But for the most part, I thought high school was pretty easy, and I had quite a bit of hubris going into university, and I wanted to go to the best schools in the US. And I had other wonderful institutions that reached out to me. In hindsight, now I look back and I go, wow, those were really awesome schools, but they weren't the top ones. And so I sort of, moved away from those because I was going to go to the top schools. And I specifically looked for the most rigorous programs for two reasons. Number one, I wanted the challenge and I thought I was up to it. And number two, I wanted the degrees that were going to pay me the most money out of school. So I got both of those when I chose chemical engineering and decided to add an economics degree on top of that just for fun.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah, as you
what I
do.
learned, as one does.
I did
Um,
economics too, so I actually do think that is fun. But
that was actually the fun part of college. It
yeah.
was the engineering that sort of tore me up a little bit. But so I'll go through the framework through telling that story. So
Mm.
when I went into school, I was a good student, and I was very much an introvert. So I wasn't one to ask a lot of questions or things like that. So when I was in the chemical engineering classes, and actually organic chem, for example, was one that was specifically difficult. I struggled, and for the first time, I had to. I sat in class. I remember one time I was thinking in class because I had a friend in high school who wasn't good at math, and she would always ask these questions, and I would think, how is it that you cannot understand something in the class? This is all so simple, and she just struggled with it. And I remember thinking in class, now I feel what she
Yeah.
was feeling when I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I can't even. I can't even ask a question because I have no idea what's going on. And so there's certain classes that were incredibly challenging, and being that far away from home, not having the support structure that I was used to, I struggled, and that was for the first time. And what I recognized, and I watched other people who were also struggling, because all of us were coming from situations where we were the number one in our class in high school. That's why we were at Stanford in the first place. And now we're all in a very tough situation. Probably a lot of people like me choosing classes that perhaps they should have, been a bit more honest and humble when they were choosing those classes. And so one of the first lessons that I had to learn at Stanford was, and I called it grow up. So the framework, everything ends with the word up, because we're all about moving up, and we're all about progress. So I had to grow up. And what that meant was that I couldn't continue to do what I was doing, because what I used to do wasn't working anymore. So where I was able to go to class, understand the material, do the homework, breeze over some information, take a test, now I needed to actually dig more. I had to reach out to the professor. I had to ask questions. I had to find other people. I had to find other resources. And I had to make a choice. Am I going to grow up and actually take these actions and make the change and change me to get the result that I want? Or the opposite of that is to drop out. And I knew that I was not a quitter, and I wasn't going to drop out. So I recognized that I had to make a choice. And the choice was, I have to grow up. I have to, and in order for me to grow, then it means I need to go through. I can't avoid these things,
Yeah.
because my tendency was, I will tell you, I did avoid one thing: electrical engineering classes. And to this day, electricity, I do not understand. And because I avoided it, I really should have taken a double E class. But in order to succeed, you have to go through the process.
Yeah.
The learning comes through the doing. The learning doesn't come by reading it, by learning about it. It's actually by doing it. And so that was lesson number one. I had to grow up, and I had to do that in the 4 years that I was on the Stanford campus. So I did graduate with both degrees, very excited. And the great thing about that is, once I have it, you can't take it away from me. I have it
can't
forever.
take it away from
No,
you.
they
No.
can't. I got it. I'm in. And then I'll fast forward to my first engineering job. And the lesson that I learned in this first engineering job is to step up. And it's closely related to the grow up, but it's around delivering results, and the fact that in the real world versus in an academic world, the results are critical. So I think about a doctor, for example. A doctor in med school can take a test and get a B and still move on to the next class, or a C.
No one dies.
Move on to the next class. No one died. But in real life, I would like to see an A on every surgery, sir or Miss Doctor, right? And so same thing, even in engineering, there are things that you could do, and you could sort of make it and maybe not get every single thing. But I recognize that when you're in the real world, that pressure needs to be at the right level, or that we can't have the plant blowing up because I did 80% of the work. And so the results that you provide are critical, not just for life and safety, but for the results of the business. And so I recognize that there was a shift. And so results are fundamental. And so I had to learn that whatever I was doing, I wasn't just doing it to sort of get a check in the box, but I was doing it because the outcome mattered. And so I think bringing purpose to what I was doing actually helped me to be more and more careful about what I was working on, with whom I was working, and the results that I had. So I call that one stepping up, because it's stepping up out of the protection of an academic environment to the real world where the results actually matter. So during my hands-on engineering phase, that's the lesson, right? Step up. So the first one, grow up. Second one, step up. While I was stepping up as an engineer, though, I started to observe things around me as I was seeing engineers or professionals that were being promoted, or that were getting the nice assignments, or were getting to travel with leaders, and those that weren't. And I started to kind of see a difference. And one of them actually, I noticed with an intern that joined our group one summer. And this particular intern, we were in a pretty rough industrial environment. So most of us wore maybe a polo shirt and jeans, or a khaki, something that's, that could be, if it's damaged, it's okay. And this young man wore a button-down shirt and dress pants and dress shoes to the plant every day. And he would wear the safety garb when he was going into the plant. But in the office, he was always dressed up. And he would always say, my dad always said to me, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And I recognized two things from observing that gentleman. Number one, his dad was telling him that. So he had somebody in his life who
Yeah.
was preparing him for what it takes to be successful in a corporate environment. Not everybody has that.
Yeah.
Not everybody has a corporate dad who is giving you
Yeah.
this kind of advice. And number two, I did see that he was treated differently. I did see that he was, even though he was an intern, the general perception was that he was going places. That whatever he had his first job, he certainly got an offer from our company. He was already seen, even as an intern, as somebody who was leadership material. And I
Mm.
saw that not in just how people dressed, I saw that in how they carried themselves. I saw that in people who showed up at events that maybe I thought were not
Yeah.
important, but turns out that they were. So lesson number 3 in kind of preparing for leadership was to show up. And I think in this environment where a lot of us are remote, it means that even when you're remote, to show up, like we're showing up here on camera, to show up in the room, if you're in the building and there are people in a room, to go to the room, because it makes a difference. It does make a
Yeah.
difference to show up how you dress. And every company is different, right? The companies I worked for were pretty formal. Not all companies are formal. So if you work for Google, dress like whatever Google looks like. If you work for Microsoft, dress for Microsoft. But that connection, recognizing again, how am I being perceived? I'm being perceived by the fact that I'm there. That's one. The
Yeah.
how I dress and how I show up. That's number 2. And then how I actually, show up in terms of my posture. So how I walk. Do I walk like a leader? Do I stand like a leader? And when I do my training, I do a quick exercise where I ask people in the training to do 2 things. The first thing is to sort of raise your shoulders and put your head down and kind of look like this, and
Yeah.
then talk about, how do I feel if I look like this? And then the opposite is to have your head up with your shoulders down. And it's just a small change, but it even
Makes such
changes
a
the way I
difference though.
I sound,
Yeah.
yeah, and the way I feel. Yeah, just a
Yeah.
small thing. So that one is show up, and we talk about, how I learned through some of my experiences why it was important to be in certain places. And there were times where I thought, I'm busy working on this project, I can't go to that happy hour.
Mm.
But there are decisions made at that happy hour, and
Yeah.
and that's an opportunity to connect with people, both leaders and others on your team. And I had to learn, and it was a friend of mine that told me that. Said, Camille, it's you really need to go. These, I know you don't
Yeah.
feel, you feel like it's a waste of time, but it's actually part of the job for you to
Yeah.
go. So I had to learn to do that kind of thing.
I think sometimes, and I know I definitely thought this myself, and I've also observed it in others. I think there's sometimes a reluctance from people to kind of admit to themselves that all that stuff matters. I think we perhaps try and kid ourselves that, oh, I'm doing a good job, so it doesn't matter that doing a good job should be, quote unquote enough. And sure, like that's a really lovely sentiment, but it's not it works in the real world, unfortunately. So, back
Yeah.
to your earlier point about having a choice. So I guess it's everything in life, isn't it? It's the choice to kind of recognize that whether you like it or not, this is the reality of the
Mhm.
corporate world, the work world, and you
Yeah.
have a choice to either embrace that and to show up and to do these things, or to just kind of live in your own kind of delusion and keep telling yourself that, oh, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? Have you seen that
Indeed.
too?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I did a talk a few years ago, and I'm trying to remember exactly. We talked about this showing up, and it was really maybe around leadership of people. And one person had a question, and they said that, "Hey, I don't understand how decisions are made based on, this sort of soft, loosey goosey stuff. I'm doing my
Mm,
project and we're getting results. Is that not enough?" And I had a bit of a sarcastic answer, and I said, when you're leading things, that's probably just fine. The things don't
yeah,
care, right? But when you're leading humans,
yeah,
then all of these interactions make a difference. And leadership or becoming a leader, all of these things are all about human interaction. And so it's not just doing the work. That's great. Robots can do that.
Yeah.
But robots are not
And
going
they're
to
probably
interact
going
eye
to.
to eye
Yeah.
yet. There'll come a day when maybe they'll replace
Yeah.
us as well. But for now, we still have human interaction. We still have individual feelings, one for another.
Yeah.
And that is what we're managing. And that's what we're fostering as we're fostering our leadership skills.
Yeah. And you have to be seen. If no one knows that you're there, it's pretty
Exactly.
unlikely that they're going to tap you on the shoulder and go, "Oh, Camille, we think you're amazing. We'd like to we'd like to hand
Right.
you this new promotion." If they don't know you, if they've never had an interaction with you, if
Exactly.
they've never said, "Oh, I noticed that Camille's always at these events. Let me go and have a conversation with Camille."
Exactly.
And like the intern, in his smart outfit, people noticed him because of that. And I would suspect
Hmm.
he had more conversations than someone who perhaps hadn't presented themselves that way. Yeah.
Indeed. And I think if somebody wants to, and I'll tell you, when I came out of college, my perfect job would have been in a back room as an analyst doing some very important work and never having to talk to anybody. I would have said that would be my perfect job. And those jobs are needed and
Yeah.
required, and that's great. But that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And if that's what somebody wants to do for their career, that's fantastic. We need people to continue to do that work. But if you decide that you would like to have a leadership role, you would like to have influence in the organization, to be a part of strategic decision making, then we need to then
Yeah.
upgrade our leadership capabilities.
Yeah. The next up.
Yes. So the next, oh, look at that. Next up. I might have to use that for something,
You
Emma.
can borrow that. I'll
So
let you have that one.
thank you. So the next lesson is speak up. And it's closely related to show up. And I think you said something about if you don't tell your story, then who is going to know what you're working on? And I've had several instances where I sat in a meeting early on in my career. I remember we were trying to solve a problem and I had an idea, but I talked myself out of my own idea, told myself the idea was stupid, and I was not going to share my idea. Okay. 5 minutes later, somebody else shares the same idea that I had, and it was brilliant. And I'm thinking, I mean, can I be mad at that person? I'm thinking, wait a
Yeah.
minute, that was my idea. Well, no, because I actually didn't share it. And so shame on me because I didn't share my idea. Now I was able to add to his and everything, but there's no way I could say, well, that's my idea too. No,
Yeah. I thought of it
that was,
first.
that's right. That's where I recognize that, and that person, it maybe even if it was a dumb idea, okay, it's a dumb idea, but I'm going to share it anyway. Why?
Yeah.
Because I'm in the room for a reason, right? We're here to bring all the ideas to bear. And typically what happens when you're doing something like brainstorming is that the final decision isn't one of the ideas. It's a
Yeah.
consolidation of all of them, right? And we take all the
Yeah.
goodness of all of them to come up with what that best solution is. So even if it was a dumb idea, I'm bringing it anyway. So Camille, today, Camille, this might be a dumb idea, but here it is. I
And
thought
that
of this. Somebody else can add to that. It's so go ahead.
Yeah, and even if it is a not great idea, it might actually then spark in someone else. That might be the bridge between, thinking A and thinking D. It might be the thing that
Yes,
gets someone else to the idea that's actually potentially the solution. They're all kind of bricks in the wall, in a
indeed.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I think you shared too, if you're busy working on something important, but you never tell anyone,
yeah,
then who will know that you worked on that very important thing? So another reason to speak up. A third reason to speak up is if you don't tell your own story, someone else will. And it
yeah,
likely may not be the story you want told. And so
yeah,
it's so important that you own your own story, you own your own narrative, and you're repeating that as you're interacting, as you go to the happy hour, as you go to golf. I say golf, I don't play golf. As you go to the events, that you are actually sharing with people what you're working on, the successes that you've had, and sometimes very importantly, what it is that you need from them
yes,
to make an ask. And sometimes we forget that piece and we think people are going to hear what we're doing and automatically know that we need something or what we need. And sometimes we're lucky that way, but
Yeah.
most of the time we're going to have to ask for what we need. And so that speaking up is so important. And as an introvert, as a shy person, as somebody who wants to be in the background, that was a skill that I had to build over time and get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's not something I love to do. But in order to get what I needed, I had to speak up. I had to ask for what I needed. I had to let people know what I was working on, and I had to speak up in meetings and share my thoughts and ideas. That's what our companies pay us to do.
Yeah.
So it's very
Yeah.
important.
Your point there around, and I think it's also true for show up as much as it is for speak up. And I'm really interested in your thoughts on this. That as someone who, as you said, naturally shy, naturally introverted, not kind of naturally the person that would, be shouting, not shouting, but be the loudest voice in the room, and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Again, 100% agree with you. But how? I think that's the bit that people get really stuck on.
Yeah.
They can logically totally agree with what you're saying. Again,
Mm-hmm.
it's a conversation I have a lot with my own clients as well. Logically, they get it. They
Yeah.
even might, understand the steps of these are the things that you actually need to do. Great. But that first little step of action is just so scary sometimes.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
oftentimes
Yeah.
how did you manage to kind of overcome that, particularly in those
Yeah.
first few where you don't even have the reflections of success to look back on?
Yeah. Two things, and I think you alluded to one of them just now in your question. The first one is baby steps, right? So I didn't go from not being able to speak in that meeting to taking over the meeting. I'm gonna take over a meeting today, right? It was baby step. And so in the example of being in a meeting and feeling like either I have something to say, but I'm afraid to say it, or I don't have anything to say. Sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and I really have no input. I got nothing, right? But I can still participate. I can ask a question,
Mm,
which is sort of a lower intensity way
yeah,
of interacting, right? I can amplify somebody else's idea, or I can
yeah,
even just congratulate them. I could just say, wow, that's a really good point that Emma made. I hadn't thought of it that way. I
yeah,
haven't said anything, but I'm contributing. I'm certainly giving Emma kudos. And so that's a positive thing, that's showing leadership without really having to say a lot. So just baby steps, I think, helps. And so
mm.
you don't have to go from zero to infinity in a day.
Which
Or
leaves us our fifth up.
okay, the fifth and last up is level up. And that sort of encompasses everything. And when I talk about level up, I talk about um, preparing for that move, right? So all these things you're saying, okay, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to show up, and now I'm being noticed. Okay, now I need to be ready to take on this leadership responsibility. So learning, what does it mean to be a leader in this organization? And that's through exposure, try and experience different experiences in the organization, some training. I had leadership development training, and I look back to that to this day. So getting that leadership training and preparing for those roles. The second element of level up is once you are leading, being sure that you are bringing the next generation along. So it's leadership is not just about me. Leadership is about others. It's not just, and not even just my team, but even my leaders, my peers, and my direct reports, but bringing people along and helping them understand what it takes to get to that level. And then the third level of the third element of level up that I know I need, and maybe a lot of people like me need, is to learn how to celebrate successes and celebrate the
Yeah.
wins. That is not our, I come from a support function, and I always look to salespeople, sales and marketing people who are fantastic about celebrating. The rest of the organization does not celebrate like sales, and we can learn from them because it is energizing and it is motivating when you recognize, wow, we did a good job on this. wow, the team really came together. Wow, look at the result and what that means for the business and the strategy of the business. Not just, okay, that's done. What are you going to have to do for me
Yeah.
lately? So a part of leadership is celebration. And I learned that from, so while watching salespeople, I used to sort of smirk at salespeople. Oh, there they go again. But they had something
Yeah.
going. One quick story on celebrating in procurement in one of my organizations. We had the year before a record year in terms of the results. And we were having a global leadership meeting. And I stood up and I'm presenting to the group. And I said, okay, last year we had a record year and the room is quiet. And one of the people in the room got up and said, did you just hear what she said? We had a record year last year. Shouldn't we celebrate? And I thought,
Yes.
and so of course we got up and had a good time. And ever since then, it just really stuck with me that and this was and she was from, I'll just say she was from Brazil. And so I think the culture there too
Yeah.
kind of could teach
Yeah.
us a lot about
Yeah.
celebrating. But it really stuck with me because I realized that people can be so demoralized with all of the work and all of the pressure and everything coming. Just a small celebration, a small dinner, an
Mm.
outing, a team building event. And then for individuals, just kudos on something that they've done in the
Yeah.
day. It means so much. It's cheap
Yeah.
and it can really help the group get through tough times when we're good about, giving them great recognition for good work.
And also, I think just that human connection of
Yeah.
saying to another person, "Wow, that was great! Like, well done! Like, you did a really good job."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a. I mean, it's a different point, but I think more broadly, there's a bit of a lack of human connection in the world today, and even just those kind of small instances, I think could make such a huge difference. And they're the things that over time probably bond teams together and to leaders as much
Hmm.
as anything else, I think.
So true. So true. I think about my favorite leaders.
Yeah.
The images that stick in my mind are celebration events or when they gave me feedback on something. Certainly when they gave me constructive feedback as well. That's a gift,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that too. But it's usually what sticks in my mind are all the positive interactions that I had with them.
Yeah. On that point, and you mentioned it a couple of times earlier as well, and I think it's really important, observation. And I think
Mm.
it's such an underrated thing to observe the people around you and kind of what are they doing that makes them great at that particular thing, or
Hmm.
I don't know, Dave is great at presentations. Like, what is it that Dave is doing that makes him great? Like, what are the components
Yeah.
of that? You're observing the intern and how he was received. You're observing your colleagues and kind
Hmm.
of trying to unpick the behaviors or the things that they're doing that are really kind of resonating, and then thinking, well, how do I weave that into my own approach? Like, how do I take that thing and put my own kind of spin on it? I think it's such an
Hmm.
underrated skill. I think particularly
Hmm.
actually when it comes to leadership and to your kind of remote working or working from home point before, I think that's one of the challenges, that it's very
Hmm.
difficult to do that when you're not necessarily in the room with someone, or
Yeah.
even just on an open floor. I think about it in my own career as well, like how much I learned just from overhearing other people's conversations and hearing how
Yeah.
other people approached a particular thing. I just think it's a really underrated, what would you call it, activity, skill? I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up with five siblings and I'm number five of six. And a lot of what I learned about even behavior as a child and as a teenager is watching my older siblings and what worked for them and what didn't work for them,
Yeah,
and okay,
yeah,
so I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do that, right? Because I can see
yeah,
how my
yeah,
parents, treated some of their teenage activities and recognize, okay, and also figured out, maybe how to get around, how to do the thing, but not get caught doing the thing. But
yeah,
it was through observation
yeah,
and
yeah,
watching how things work for them, because I think in corporations, one example of observing, and this was actually overhearing someone talking about another person's presentation to the CEO, And in that particular example, this person, while they were giving him feedback about what was wrong or what they were not going to support, he just kept going. Right? He kept going with the ask and not realizing presentation is over. You're not going to get what you
Yeah,
asked for.
they
It's
said
time for you
no.
to exit the room, right? So the
Yeah.
self-awareness, right? And that's but all I did was listen to someone else. I was over maybe I was yeah, I was overhearing someone else's
Yeah.
conversation about another person, and I recognized, okay, note to self,
Yeah.
I need to know that when I'm in those meetings to be able to read the room and understand the cues. And you're
Yeah.
right, it's much more difficult to understand those
Mm.
cues when everybody's in the room and you're on screen. And so I would tell somebody, if they had the choice to be in the room or on screen, I would tell them to take
Yeah.
the choice to be in the room for sure.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And to your show up point as well, I think if there's,
Mm-hmm.
meetings where it's, particularly if they're important meetings, if it's optional whether you're there or not, 100% be there. Like if you have the choice and you are in the same, city or whatever, you
Yes.
want to be there. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
in my
Yes.
opinion an important one where you kind of want to be in person. I
Indeed.
love that framework, Camille. I think it's so helpful. And as I said, outwardly simple and people can remember it and kind of walk through the steps, but it's a lot of complexity under each one. And
Of course.
the other thing I really like about it, and I think it's often the way, born out from your own experience, that you've kind of lived those things and seen the impact of those things and are now kind of passing those things on, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Final question, and it's always the final question here, and that is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
I chose a word for 2025, and that word is progress. And what I like about the word progress is it's not that I've arrived, and I don't know that I will arrive before the end of the year, but I do intend to be better than I was at the beginning of the year. And Camille of then, however we define then, college or early career, wanted perfection. And what I would tell her is that progress trumps perfection. That it's more important to be moving forward than to be aiming for perfection, because in perfection sometimes there's no movement at all.
Yeah.
And so there are times that I didn't move at all because I was looking for perfection. And what I look for today now is progress. And so even if in any of those cases where we talked about showing up or speaking up or leveling up, it's not about being perfect today, but let's make one step towards where we're trying to go.
Hmm. It's a really interesting transition, isn't it? And I wonder if it's something, certainly that idea of perfection for people when they're younger that are often high achievers, you hear that word often, like I'm striving to
Yeah.
be perfect. And I think there's perhaps a window of time when you are younger that maybe it's useful, but then you kind of recognize quite quickly, and maybe it's when that idea hits the real world that that
Mm,
it kind of doesn't exist and actually can do you more harm than good, both
yeah.
from your own kind of mental health, but also to your point about the inertia that can sometimes be created by that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
choose a word every year? Is that something that you do as you come into the new year?
This was the first time, and it came out of I live in Cincinnati in the US, and there's this church in Dallas. So they're far away from me, and I watch them online, and they choose a word every
Mm,
year. And so I thought, that's a good idea. And so I kind of thought through that late last year and decided that that was going to be my word. And the other reason I chose the word is that it's a noun and a verb, right? So we progress to
mm,
achieve progress, right? So there's sort of two elements. And so I don't know, I love that because I could think of, okay, what am I doing to achieve progress? But as I do that,
yeah.
I am progressing towards it. So it's just, I don't know, I just it was fun coming up with the idea, and I've been sort of reflecting on it throughout the year,
Mm,
and reflecting on my own progress as I
yeah.
continue to build out what it is that I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, we're all still working on that, aren't we?
Yeah.
One day when I grow up.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Camille. I've really enjoyed that conversation. And as I say, I really love your approach to that and the framework itself. And thank you very much for sharing it and sharing your stories and what you've learned so far.
Thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Very welcome.